So before we begin, it's important at Royal Roads University to, of course, acknowledge our traditional lands. So Royal Roads University does acknowledge that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Wasepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. We're very, very grateful to be here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. So we appreciate you all being here, and thank you so much. Without further ado, of course, while you're all here, our webinar today is Designing Organizations for Wellbeing. It is my privilege to be co-hosting with Dr. Kathy Bishop, who's the Associate Professor and Program Head of the MA Leadership Executive Leadership Specialization, and Elizabeth Cordeau-Chatelain, who's an Associate Faculty and Doctoral Candidate here at Royal Roads. And of course, me, I'm Mariana Konjerski, and I'm an Education Specialist in Recruitment here at Royal Roads University. Without further ado, Kathy, I will go ahead and pass it to you to say a few words about our agenda today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ariana, and a heartfelt welcome to everyone. We are also very excited to have you here in terms of designing organizations for well-being. So as you can see from our agenda, it is starting with a welcome and some introductions. Thank you, Ariana. And in a moment, we're going to head right into our Designing for Organizational Wellbeing mini seminar. And throughout it, you're more than welcome to have questions entered into the chat box, and we'll have some conversations as we can. And then at the end of the seminar, once it's done, for those of you who are interested, you can also stay on and we'll give a bit of an overview of our MA in Leadership, Executive Leadership program, as well as upcoming intakes. So with that, we'll just sort of move on to a little bit of an overview for designing workplaces. So this, as I said, is sort of a mini seminar, mini session, and I'm really delighted to be here with Elizabeth Cordeau-Chatelain, my esteemed colleague, who is a previous senior leader for an international company. She's a certified psychological health and safety advisor, and one of our important faculty member who advises, mentors, and teaches in our MA Leadership, Executive Leadership program. So Elizabeth and I are passionate to explore with you designing organizations for workplace well-being, look at some of the issues and approaches and see how they might support your organization's well-being strategies. So in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth because she's going to lead this session. But first, I just want to highlight that workplace well-being is a critical need. So if we can just advance the slide, please. Thank you. And as I said, workplace well-being is a critical need in our world today. As you can see, a little over 30% of employees say that they are thriving in their well-being, and that's an only, because that means 67% are surviving and 19% have identified as being miserable. What a way that our workplaces, we spend so much time in to feel miserable. Workplace well-being is a key trend. It was identified by Deloitte and goes beyond individual work-life balance. And that's why we're talking about designing organizations, because it really extends to a human-centered organizational systems approach. And with that, for even a deeper dive, I'm going to send it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Kathy, and welcome everybody. I'm looking forward to spending the next 40 minutes or so with you to really tackle 3 questions today. Depending on where your worldview is and how you are in your organization in terms of organizational well-being, design, and structure, really we start always with why. Why is this important? So the opportunity here is to give you some fodder to either work within your organizations or to give the reasons to pursue some of this important work. Then we'll go a little bit into some different systems and frameworks that are available to get us started. How do we actually do organizational well-being? And then we'll finish off with what underpins all of it. And clearly you'll see a bias around leadership, just a little bit of an advance for that for you. So really, what is organizational well-being? You know, there are all kinds of different programs and theories and definitions around it. But, you know, the one that really resonates is really the one from the World Health Organization. You know, workers and managers collaborate on a continuous basis to protect and promote three key factors. One is the physical environment, safety at work, the psychosocial work environment, which is organizational culture and workplace culture, and then making sure that there are personal health resources to encourage healthy lifestyles. There's also something grounded in sustainability principles where the organization is healthy. And we'll get into that a little bit more deeply. But my sort of Cole's Notes view of it is it's the state of mental, physical, and economic health of an organization's employees, activities, and deliverables, which have a positive long life outcome for everyone and everything involved. So what does that mean? Why worry about it? Well, we know that organizations and workplaces have an enormous impact. We spend, 60% of our waking hours at work, and really, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, no one should feel bad about coming to work every day. So if there was ever a reason, we spend so much time, why is it important? And, it's interesting. I've been in this space for probably 6 or 7 years now. And, the dialogue and the discussion has really amplified. We have so many different ways of talking about mental health and being well at work. And, at the end of the day, it really comes down to how do we want our organizations to be sustainable? And again, going back to the UN sustainability goals, there are actually 3 goals that sustain our work life. And so again, another reason, the goal around well-being, making sure that people are healthy, that we have decent work and economic growth, and we have to reduce inequality. And our organizations, our workplaces are front and center in being able to deliver on those goals. In addition, what have we been seeing? In 2019, the World Health Organization's 11th revision on international classification of diseases said that burnout is actually an occupational hazard. It's a workplace stress is a thing, and it comes from the types of cultures and the types of workplaces we actually thrive in. And that, I remember it was a bit controversial when it came out. But as we've gone through COVID and we've gone through so many different challenges around the world of work and now how work has changed, we're noticing that burnout is really prevalent. In my other life, I'm a leadership coach with a health authority, and burnout of our medical staff is incredibly important, and we have to look at different ways to support people. Growing voices. For our international folks, you probably heard about the culture of Hockey Canada as well. But there are lots of different reasons, and we're seeing different people and different voices stepping up to say it's important for our organizations to be focused on well-being, to operate from a values-based place, and to make sure that people are poised to be safe at work. So, there's lots of things amplifying the dialogue. So just a little quick check-in from the chat box. Why are you here? And what might be your most compelling reason for wanting to foster well-being in your organization? Just curious, what brought you here today? What's resonating for you in some of those different reasons?
Hi, Elizabeth. I'm sort of looking at the chat box, and hello, Kelly. So lovely to see that you're Director of Healthcare, and yes, a very exhausted and unusual time. I see. So Susie has said, I'm passionate about strengthening workplace culture to build intentionality with trust and respect as a foundation. You're in the right place. Us too. Diane says how well-being helps keep employees engaged in their work. For sure. Thank you, Diane. And Felicia, sorry, says to create a happy and safe working environment. Terrific. We have Romina, who says, I believe that to mobilize the masses towards solving the critical problems of today, people need discretionary energy left over at the end of the day to volunteer for people and the planet. Yes. And then Christine, hi Christine, starting a new job and the culture is somewhat toxic and not collaborative and want to shift the mindset. It's important, wonderful to hear. We so need this leadership. Addis says, for me, psychological safety is about inclusiveness and we need to raise awareness. We've got Amory with reduced stress and exhaustion of frontline staff and improve retention, employee of work. And Asya says, I'm an architect student and I'm interested in learning how to incorporate well-being factors into design. Oh, terrific. We've got such a rich experience, but also desire in our group today, Elizabeth. And thank you all for your wisdom in the chat box and your intentionality of why you're here.
You know, I think it's great to talk about why we want to do this work, because, you know, to be honest, there's nothing really that prepares a lot of organizations for understanding really how to approach an organization that's focused on well-being. And we always say, you know, in our programs, but also generally, you know, in coaching as well, is follow your passion and follow your why. There's some really great sessions like Simon Sinek and a number of different groups who really encourage that, and organizational well-being is no different. What is your why here? So let's go into some frameworks. I'm going to focus on one primarily, but we will explore some other ones. But really, we're going to talk about Canada's National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. You know, for those of you who may know it, the standard is, you know, it's 10 years old now, ISO certified. And what it does is that it offers a framework to design organizational well-being. You know, in the standard calls it psychological health and safety in the workplace, you know, and now it's the first of its kind in the world, but now a couple of other countries, one in Australia and in the UK, they've adapted and have been working it through. But essentially, what we're looking at is a framework to actually look at the different elements that contribute to psychological safety and well-being. So, you know, the factors are here, everything from offering psychological supports, but also what are expectations from leadership? How do we foster civility and respect? How do we involve and influence our employees? What about growth and development? What about workload management? So if you're looking for a pretty good off-the-shelfer in terms of designing well-being, the standard is really terrific. And again, it's underpinned by a lot of fundamental principles, which we'll go about talking about. But it really takes this systems approach to the workplace. And essentially, there are three main areas to look at. And this is a great way to look at a framework for well-being. What's the commitment and leadership? What are the policies and procedures? And then how do we engage and have employees participate in the work? And so from a leadership perspective, from an organizational perspective, the role is to design that framework, but also make sure that there are people who are committed, who will champion the work. You have to have a sponsor, and then there has to be role models. So that's really the standard in a nutshell. There's actually, in addition to that, there is a program and a booklet that's associated with the national standard. It's called Assembling the Pieces, and that's in the resource section later. But it gives you a step-by-step approach around the action orientation of this work. You know, and again, it starts with commitment and leadership. there's a lot of planning involved, and then there's implementation and checking. So it's, you know, it's a virtuous loop of work. And so the most important thing is to not only think and plan, but to do. You know, I was in a corporate life for a long time, and what separated a lot of organizations was talking about action and then actually doing things. And so when we're looking at designing well-being, we have to walk the talk. We have to put the systems in place. And this assembling the pieces is a really good way to tackle the issue in your organizations. The other interesting thing about the national standard is that it's grounded in transformational leadership theory. You know, I haven't seen too many ISO certified documents that actually say this is the type of leadership that is required in an organization in order to fulfill the goals of the national standard. And so, you know, transformational, there's so many leadership theories out there. Pick one that makes sense to you. But transformational leadership theory, you know, has been developed over the last 50 years, primarily made famous, I guess, by Bass and Avolio. And they provide very specific leadership characteristics that drive this work. So again, if you're looking for different ways to tackle this and to design the organization, it's important to look at the type of leadership you expect within the organization to lead it. Sorry, I'm just going to go to the next slide. Oops, I jumped. And so what are the design considerations? Really from harm to care, right? The goal of the standard is, you know, to actually shift a culture. And so when we say let's design, the question really is, how do we shift the culture? And what the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety advises is really very similar to working with the standard, saying that, well, you know, we need to protect, we need to support, we need to give access, and we need involvement. And that's a framework for them, which is really underpinned by the ethics and values of the organization. But there are a lot of other different ways to look at this, right? So in the interest of saying, what are the different designs? There's also another design you can look at, which is, it's from Wolf, Sheth, and Sisodia, the conscious capitalism folks in the States. If you haven't heard of them, they're worth taking a look at. They coined something in the mid-noughts called firms of endearment. And what they say is, you know, a firm of endearment is a company that endears itself to stakeholders by bringing the interests of the stakeholder groups into alignment. No stakeholder group benefits at the expense of any other, and each prospers as others do. So, you know, if you want to take a more of a B Corp type of approach or a conscious capitalist approach, you know, these would be the different stakeholders and the different groups you would want to have a look at to develop your plan. And Kathy, I'll let you tackle this one. You're the expert on this one as well.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, and just building off what Elizabeth says, I mean, there are a myriad of frameworks and constructs. We also have to recognize that every framework and construct has an underlying belief, assumptions, or different worldviews. So there are different ways of knowing, being, doing, and relating. So we need to consider a variety of approaches and from different worldviews. So like Cindy Blackstock's Breath of Life theory, or the wellness wheel from our First Nation Health Authority, that again, we recognize that for this particular seminar, but throughout any of our leadership development, we're offering a fire hose of information. And here we're just seeding some of those ideas of the different models or the constructs that might fit for you. And I want to stress that these approaches and models should fit for you, that this isn't about creating cookie cutter leaders. but for you to embrace who you are as a leader and to stretch who you are becoming. And so these models can really help with that. And I just want to also recognize that there has been some wonderful notes in the chat. I know Hayden asked, how is well-being measured? Elizabeth is going to go on the next slide, speak to Barrett, who is one of the scholar practitioner who has really evolved that. But before we go there, I also recognize a couple other points that I've seen in the chat box and also that Elizabeth raised. You know, Addis spoke to that online psychological safety is also as important as in-person safety, which of course in this day and age with COVID and what's all going on, us figuring out how to create online psychological safety is incredibly important. So this is another area and model and construct to dig deeper in. And I also noticed that Stacy, you know, spoke to with, you know, the SDG goals that Elizabeth identified, also that gender equality is an important consideration when we're thinking of leadership and models to sort of look at. And then with Elizabeth, which again, as we continue on, and she speaks to Barrett, and we'll also speak to values and values-based leadership, that with transformational leadership, it is about being purpose-driven, inspiring, people-driven, innovative, which is also under the umbrella of values-based leadership. And what values-based leadership also then offers is values as a way to move forward through these areas with, again, more frameworks and constructs that as you dig in and start to be able to pull on different techniques and strategies and approaches, this will really add some excitement and energy into your workplace to support you as you move forward. So at this point, I think I'll turn it back to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Kathy. That's just a wonderful recap of the fire hose of information we're giving you in 40 minutes. You know, it's, but it's, I think a couple of things are really clear around that. One is, you know, your organization and you as a leader really dictates the how and the what. And depending on how you're structured as well, will give you some direction in terms of how you get there. What you're seeing in the different models and what you're seeing in the conversation that we're having thus far, and I love the comments in the chat, is that we have to focus on the system. You know, I've been around for a while, and too often we look at big picture things as a program, an initiative, or a project. If you walk away with one thing today, understand that when you're looking at organizational well-being, it's about the system. And that means there are certain criteria and there are certain things that we really need to have a look at. And Kathy mentioned Richard Barrett, who has done a whole lot of work around the values-driven organization, and I have the book in front of me, The Values-Driven Organization. It's a great book, and it's the subtitle is Cultural Health and Employee Wellbeing as a Pathway to Sustainable Performance. And what Richard Barrett and his colleagues have done is they've tried to create a structure and some measurement tools to show us what kind of energy we are bringing into an organization and see how we can change it. And so if you want to, you know, there's a lot of ways to explore that at the Value Center, but also here is a bit of a roadmap to actually look at how to change the culture. And you'll see, you know, in the center is vision and values and behaviors, which is the end of the first part of cultural transformation, and then moving into the change and alignment piece and action piece. That's part of it. So what about values? Kathy had a great introduction to it. We talk a lot about values everywhere, it doesn't align with my values, etc. What are the values of the organization? What are my values? Values are essentially a shorthand way of describing what's important to us. And when we look at organizational well-being, it's really important to ask the question, what is important to us in terms of employee health? What is important to us in terms of employee mental health? What kind of organization do we want to be, and how are we going to contribute to society? Someone in the chat mentioned online health. Well, there's been a lot of chit chat around Twitter and Google and Meta and Facebook about what that's doing to young people. What are the values of the organization? Are we creating societal well-being with some of the tools that we're using? So it's, we think about the organization as just what about what we're doing inside the organization, but also what are we doing outside the organization? And so there's also that concept of organizational values. And it's about having those conversations. We need to really be explicit about what we value, what's important to us, and how we want to be. And so when we're designing for well-being, those conversations are paramount. So Kathy, is there anything you'd like to add before I get into the leadership connection?
Carry on. I think you're doing excellent. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you. So the leadership connection, if you look at, if we go back to, the organization and the ethics and the roadmaps and everything, you look at the different models that we've introduced at this point, really it's about leadership. So I just want you to do a quick little exercise with me to see how compelling this actually is. Close your eyes for a second and just think about the best boss you've ever had. Just close your eyes. Who is that person? How'd they make you feel? What do they do well? Just take a second for that. Okay, you're in your happy place? Okay, now what I'd like you to do is switch, do a 180, and think about the worst boss you've ever had. We've all had them. How did they make you feel? What did they do? What triggered you? How did you respond to that? Just sit in that for a sec. Okay, let me bring you back. What was the difference? What was your mental emotional state while you noticed the differences, while you made the comparisons? How did you physically feel? How did you what were the differences? And I love to do this. Sometimes we do it in breakouts, and sometimes we do it in chat boxes, and we do it in person. And the energy changes quite a bit as a result of making the comparisons. And so that mind-body connection to how we respond to leaders and what happens to us in our workplaces is real. That's just a little exercise for you to try if you're interested in helping other people make that connection as well. Because really, what does make the difference is leadership. There's a whole lot about leadership development and how important this is in connecting to well-being. So I'll turn it over to Kathy to talk about that.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. I think, you and I appreciate everybody on the call, and Susie, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, also has put a great question in the chat, which I think also speaks to this, which is wondering how we build teams for success that can sustain themselves between different leaders. What do you recommend? So I'm going to come back to that. But I think at the heart of leadership development is that often leaders rise to positions and are expected to know how to develop thriving organizational cultures. But how do they know to do that without learning? And so that in our world, there really exists this genius without learning myth that, that there's this idea that genius doesn't need study or exposure to the work of others or craftsmanship. It does. And so for the key focus of leadership development in our world today, it really is about developing the character and capabilities of leaders to respond to all the challenges that there are. And so how do we strengthen that as organizational leaders? And what we know is the world really needs trustworthy leaders, leaders who have a clear sense of purpose and values and can take a full spectrum approach to effectively meet challenges. So the Edelman Trust Institute in 2020 identified that declining trust around the world, and that it's built on, again, competence and ethics. And so if we think of ethics being character, then competence and character really can take us to another model, which is Stephen Covey's trust matrix. And so often we think about, well, how do we build trust? And that's where we can think in terms of values like Covey or like Barrett's full spectrum approach, and really start to unpack what that means. So Covey does that through considering character, looking at sort of as a reflection on who we are in the inside, your intent and your integrity, whereas competence is how you are viewed on the outside, your capabilities in terms of your skills and experience, but also the results that you get. So again, you can start to look at how values can then help things like caring, openness, honesty, can help us in that direction. And you'll see on the right, there's sort of the little colorful picture. Well, this is Barrett's full spectrum approach, that values aren't just, oh, well, let's just pick one value or two, but that we can really approach it mindfully and intentionally through looking at 7 levels of consciousness and ways to move forward in any kind of organizations, those being thinking about viability, relationships, performance, evolution or transformation, alignment, collaboration, and contribution. And that's personally for me why I think it's really important to gather community, to rekindle enchantment, have values of grace and care. If we think about, viability, there's a real sort of, that's where we come in with safety. Whereas if we start to think about grace, that could be in our contribution or how we align, so that we recognize that sometimes when we're dealing with our people, we may be coming at different organizational problems from different places. And so looking at these kind of models can really provide a roadmap of how for us to move forward. So again, this takes us to back to Hayden's comment around, or I think it was Hayden, I apologize. Was it Hayden? Yes, Hayden, in terms of how well-being is being measured. So Barrett offers some specific assessment tools. And at the heart of it, though, is dialogue, is us having these kind of conversations, that what integrity may mean to me in the organization may be something different to what it means to you. And so then this interweaves with Susie's comment in terms of, well, how do we as leaders build teams that can sustain themselves between different leaders? Well, we know senior leaders set the tone and atmosphere of any organization. So without a doubt, as leaders come and go on the big picture, that is going to have an impact on an organization. So one way to support that is to have leadership development programs and to encourage our senior leaders or our rising leaders to come into these kind of programs so that they can really see what their impact is and how they can build sustainable organizations. So that's sort of on a bigger picture level. That's one way to enter this. And more specifically then, as leaders, so mid-level leaders in this process where you're looking at building teams, again, there's a way of intentionally looking at it. And for one, for me, example is, especially when I was in the mid-level before I became a senior leader, and I had, situations with changing leaders. I think one of the key pieces is to foster thriving teams, and then as a leader, run interference as that gatekeeper to support your teams to continue to thrive, and at the same time manage what's going on within the greater system and take leads in how to impact the greater system as a team while you're working with a new leader and bringing them into this new organizational leader into your team as you're helping your team move forward. So Susie, I hope that just planted a few ideas. It's not a fulsome answer to your question, because I think it's not an easy answer. And yet I think there's great possibility in terms of looking at, because for any kind of leadership or transformation, it really is about looking at alignment with our personal pieces, with our team pieces, and with the whole organization, and how we flow through that. And really attached to meaningful visions, missions, values, with behaviors and actions. And so this really starts with ourselves and expands to involve all our colleagues and employees and organizational leaders. Barrett, very clearly says organizations don't transform, individuals do. And when individuals transform, leaders transform. And so again, I think it starts with who we are and how we cultivate our own leadership practice and what uniqueness we bring. I know, one of my own passions is around nature and how nature can help us co-create our own cultures. I'll be giving a TED Talk with that for RRU in February, but really looking at creating thriving workplaces for well-being and wisdom. But the heart of that, though, is our own leadership practice and the practices within our organizations. So much I can talk about. I'm going to stop there and turn it back to Elizabeth. Thanks for your wonderful questions.
Kathy, it's so helpful to have you provide that passion and wisdom to the conversation, because I think, when we're looking for a solution around how do we do this, it is important to step back and say, well, what are we really trying to achieve? And again, we're really talking about culture. And so for your consideration, is organizational well-being equal directly affected by leadership practice? And I think our position on it is clearly, yep, there's a connection. And a lot of different frameworks tell us that. Now, when we talk about leadership and culture, the pioneer, I guess, key thought leader forever, he's in his 90s now, is Edgar Schein. If you haven't picked up Organizational Culture and Leadership, 5th edition, have a look at it, because he talks about what leaders do to create the culture. And if we all agree that organizational well-being is the creation of a well culture, then leaders need to pay attention to that. And this is really his model, that there are the visible and invisible aspects of what a culture is. And I think someone in the chat said, well, how do teams manage when there's a change in leadership? How do they sustain themselves? And the answer is, well, if you've got a strong culture and it's explicit, then that's one way of managing that. The other question I would ask is, well, if there's such a big difference in leaders, then maybe we should look at what kind of leaders we're putting into those roles. You know, no, it's not like we have to have cookie cutters, because that's not good. But if the underlying values, the visible, you know, the espoused values, the goals, the assumptions, how we get things done are similar, then anybody from any type of background or worldview can take over and integrate well into a team. So what, you know, how do leaders shape culture? Well, it's, you know, what we pay attention to, measure, and control on a regular basis. Hayden, you had a question about how do you measure well-being? You know, this is something that leaders should be doing and can do. You know, do you have exit interviews? Have you made your values explicit? You know, there are assessments from the Barrett models. These are leadership development reports, team values assessments. You know, what are employee survey, engagement surveys telling you? What are your metrics around employee wellness? What's your absenteeism rate? What is your stress level rate? How many people are on medication, or they're on sick leave, or they're suffering burnout, or whatever? There are lots of different metrics that you can measure, and leaders need to pay attention to those. It's also the things that leaders ignore or let go of. You know, a lot of organizations say, well, you know, that person's been there for a long time, and I don't know why they get promoted because they're toxic, right? It's a classic. Why are these people still there, right? What is that? And what does the organization say about that? What are we ignoring? You know, is civility and respect? We see a lot of that in healthcare. We worry about that. What do we tolerate? Are we giving an opportunity for learning for people? What kind of resources are we allocating? That's a system question. If people are working, you know, their portfolios are too large, or they're working too hard, or they're working long hours, is that their issue, or is that something around resources? Is that a leadership question? So we see how it's all connected, and how the road really does lead back to the leadership in question. So I'm looking at time, and I think I'm going to do this via chat. Just a little bit of reflection. You know, we've got 2 questions, and in the chat box, and you know, just what are your thoughts? Like, how do my personal views about organization well-being and personal well-being affect the decisions I make, right? You can consider that and put something in the chat if you like. Or what of the different systems and models approach, what is it, what resonates with me the most? And we just want to get some collective wisdom on that, if you're so inclined.
It's so great to see when people are entering in their chat answers, you know, thanks. So, Amory, and again, my apologies if I'm not getting people's names correctly, but in responding to how do my own views about personal and organization well-being affect the decisions I make, great response in terms of keeping work boundaries and not let it consume my personal time. Boundaries are so critical. Lovely. And values help us prioritize that, you know, many times, you know, when we think about, if I'm saying yes to this, what am I saying no to? So as we know what our values are, we can quite clearly say, this is an important value to me. So am I going to say yes to it, or am I going to say no to it because I'm saying yes to a different value? And often, if we're not intentional or explicit in that, we can unconsciously be dragged into places that lead us to burnout because we've over overtaxed one area that's important to us to the chagrin of other areas.
You bring up that great concept of agency, right? What's in my control, what isn't in my control. And you know, when we talk about especially mental health in the workplace and well-being, you know, there's a lot of polemic about that, you know, that, you know, not everybody who comes to work is well, and it might have nothing to do with the organization. And that's fair. The question though is, how can you support people? You know, we bring our whole selves to work, and you know, we say we look for work-life balance, but you know, regardless, we are who we are in our organizations, and being able to recognize that and support people, no matter what they might be going through, is also part of that. And so it's not a all or nothing. It's yes, and how can we help you be your best, no matter where you are at in your life. So I'll just move on. You know, as a coach, we always like to ask the question, think about one next thing you might do to design, or might do more of to design a thriving organization. And as you're putting that in the chat or considering it, I'll just close off this part with some resources and some thoughts around how you might do to design. You know, we've mentioned the Barrett sessions. There's also another type of values assessment. There's also something called the psychologically safe leader. Just type that in and you'll get a free assessment. For your own boundaries, great book from Coaching Out of the Box called Personal Groundwork for Coaching. And then there are a lot of different apps and sites. Workplace strategies for mental health, it's from Canada Life, free resources, all kinds of things you can choose from. And then there's wellness wheels to look at different ways of thinking. And then, of course, there are other options like leadership coaching and the Masters of Arts in Leadership Executive Leadership Program. And I will now turn that over to Kathy to talk more about it, and hope that this mini session has given you some food for thought.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And as you can see, there's a wealth of knowledge in this process. And that's why for leadership development, it's not a quick fix. It's a lifelong learning process. However, there is a window of opportunity to come through, especially with our MA in leadership, with the executive leadership program. So at this point, if I can ask the next slide for a couple more slides. So what I'm going to do at this point is really appreciate everybody who's come in for the mini seminar. Feel free to click off if you'd like to. Wonderful to have you here. We hope that in some ways this has inspired some informations or some ideas and planted some seeds or places where you can carry on and move forward in your own journey. And if you want to do a journey more with Royal Roads in terms of our Master of Arts in Leadership or our values-based graduate certificate in leadership, I'm going to give a little bit of that over the next 10 minutes to what that looks like. But in the meantime, really appreciate all your attendance and your willingness to think about leadership and how to design workplaces of well-being, because we definitely need it. So thank you. So with that, for people who are interested in our Master of Leadership, our program purpose really is around specializing in advanced leadership knowledge and skill for experienced mid-level to senior leaders in organizations that are committed to fostering sustainable organizational change with attention to values and culture, to strengthen both their leadership character and capabilities, and to work on organizational cultures. And, you know, it's quite interesting because a lot of our leadership or literature focuses on us as leaders, as people, and without a doubt, that is critical. However, and then we got more with teams as well. However, where we can make some really ongoing lasting change is at the systems level, that organizational level. And this is one of the sweet spots of our program, is that not only do we have people look at their own leadership piece, however, we also look at it in context of organizations themselves. So at this point, I will ask you to carry on with the slide, moving from our purpose to our actual structure. The MA Leadership Executive Leadership Program is a 2-year program. We cater to the working professional. It has 2 6-day residencies, one in the first year and one in the second year. So the bulk of the program is online. You're able to tailor your program with 9 units of electives. So I kind of stopped there when I said it's online, because where I went to was, we also believe in the cohort model at Royal Roads. And so even when COVID hit and we transferred onto online, we work really clearly to ensure that there is a real connection with online. It's not just sort of like, oh, I'm just going to sort of be in isolation working on this. We really work together as a cohort to engender deep relationships and networks through our programming. So online and it being online in some ways can be deceiving if your experience with online has simply been, oh, I'm just be working in isolation, because there's a lot of engagement and dialogue through our program. Sorry, I went off on a little tangent there, but back to our program. So yes, it's blended, it's online, but there's a deep dialogue and commitment to connection and network through it. You're able to then also pick your own 9 units of electives. So in this way, you can tailor your program to what works for you. And then at the second end of the year, you have a capstone, which is a way to apply your learning. And that capstone is an engaged leadership project, which you'll be able to interweave developing your own essential executive leadership practices with a intervention within your own organization, a change intervention. The graduate certificate in values-based leadership runs concurrently at the same time, with the MA in leadership. So the values-based graduate certificate serves as the first resident, like for the first residency's terms. I'll give you a little bit more detail, but actually, why don't we flip a slide, because I'll give you a little bit more detailed look at that program structure. You'll see that it is designed around 4 key elements: grounding and orientation, electives, organizational change leadership, which is what I was speaking to in terms of looking at interventions in organizations, as well as your own executive leadership practices, and then leading change in practice. And so that's where the capstone falls, the Lead 640, your Engaged Leadership Project, which incorporates your executive leadership practices. And I just want to say, before we go to how to apply, I just want to say one more thing, is that a unique element in our executive leadership program, which gets back to the point I was making about, yes, there's leading self, there's leading teams, and there's leading organizations, is we support leaders to build their character and capabilities by becoming aware of their values collectively and seeking to live them intentionally and explicitly through structuring the classroom as organizations. So this is akin to designing your own workplace for well-being. So learners come together to set the organizational vision, mission, purpose, and values, and then work through various activities in their own leadership and learning growth to bring it to fruition. And so this really shifts leadership from only focusing on the individual and teamwork to strategically developing organizations and only focusing on leadership from a thinking point of view to really an embodied approach in what we think, feel, do, and relate in the world with others too. Or you can turn it to how to apply. So at this point, we have our enrollment people on the line. Rhonda's with us as well. And in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Ariana to give you some finer details on how to apply. But I just would first like to offer you a little deeper overall understanding of what we're looking for with our standard and flexible admissions. So we have a standard admissions where we do require a 4-year undergraduate degree. And the key, though, is that we also require a minimum of 5 years of leadership experience, including at least 3 as a designated organizational leader with responsibilities to lead others in developing a common product or outcome with explicit values. Now, you might wonder what we mean by explicit values, and what we're looking for are things like a service orientation, commitment to collaboration and shared vision, a recognized maturity that supports organizational leadership and that fosters diversity and inclusion, and of course, workplace well-being. And around being a designated organizational leader, we do require a formal organizational leadership roles in which you do directly supervise staff or complete performance-oriented work with individuals, groups, or teams. So some of the examples of this from a director's level, or sometimes called a manager, or the person who's a head of an organizational support could be the director level. That's kind of the pivotal point. But we also have positions like, CEO, assistant directors, assistant ADMs. So again, depending on what organization you are, the actual role title can vary, as my point. So we're looking in terms of so that's kind of what we're looking for, leadership experience. And the reason why we do that is we believe that leadership is engaged. And so we are able to work on a more profound level with people who are doing the work and who are really wanting to address and get into action on the challenges that they are facing right in the moment. And that's why we are cultivating a cohort and community of leaders and for that leadership experience. We have other programs too that, absolutely, we have a suite of programs at Rural Roads. So you could, if you're an emerging leader, we want to ensure that everybody's in the right program for them, but we don't want to stop people who are passionate about leadership. I'm just drilling down on the actual executive leadership program. So that's sort of our standard admission. In terms of our flexible admissions, these are for people who don't have an undergraduate degree. And this is because we value the experience of executive leaders. And so we are looking for at least 10 years of experience, 7 in an organization with 5 years leadership experience, 3 as that designated leader. So that gives you a little bit deeper dive in terms of what we're looking for in terms of our executive leadership program. It's really organizationally focused and having leaders who are in organizations and wanting to continue to move forward in that way. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Ariana for some of the more specifics in upcoming intakes and services available. Thanks, Ariana.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Elizabeth. This was an awesome session. So thank you for your wisdom and knowledge. I know everybody really appreciates it here. So if you are looking to be a part of the MA Leadership, Executive Leadership specialization, our next intake starts April 17th, 2023. And the application deadline is January 17th, 2023, and that is coming up soon. Doesn't feel like it, but it is coming up quickly. We do applications on a rolling basis, so you can get your application in now. You do not have to wait until that deadline. Of course, we realize that going back to school is a very big step. So we do have some services available to you. We have our wonderful financial aid and award team. They handle things like loans, bursaries, scholarships, student research scholarships, other funding, and emergency funding. And they can be reached at royalroads.ca/admission/financial aid awards for all of that good information there. We also have enrollment services. They are fantastic. They can be reached at learn.more@royalroads.ca for our enrollment advisors. They can really help you narrow down your program options, answer questions, and connect you with students and alumni, because it's always good to have someone who's been through the program to chat to and get their experience. So they have a phone number as well, which is on the screen, but of course it's learn.more@royalroads.ca. And with that, we are 1 minute over, so we will wrap it up here. Thank you all so much. Please feel free to contact us to stay in touch, get some updates about the program. We have wonderful webinars that are coming up in the new year, just saying, there'll be some good stuff. And learn.more@royalroads.ca. There's also a School of Leadership blog, and that's sls.royalroads.ca/blog. So feel free to tune in. Elizabeth and Kathy, do you have any last words for our participants today before we say goodbye?
Well, for me, it's just a heartfelt thank you to you all for coming. Again, so wonderful to know. We know that leadership is so critical, and wonderful to know that you're all here interested and passionate about leadership, and wishing you a grand journey as you carry on to make an impact in the world. And also just want to give a heartfelt thank to my team in terms of Elizabeth for this, but Ariana, for Imara, and for Rhonda, who have also come aboard, because we're all committed. It takes a community. It takes a community to do leadership. Elizabeth, any final words from you?
I just want to thank everybody as well for attending. And for those of you who are joining us in the recording, hello, and thank you for getting to this part of the presentation. But also to thank Kathy as well, whose wisdom and stewardship of the programs, the Value-Based Leadership Program and the MAL-XL, just a fabulous program. It is life-changing. We're teaching in the course now, and people are loving it. So just encouraging you to tell 2 friends about it, and so on and so on. And wishing you all a wonderful holiday season.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. And we will see you next time. Take good care. Bye.